Every great civilization leaves us its rulers, the names of its kings, the faces of its gods, the tombs where its emperors were buried in gold. Egypt gave us the pharaohs. Mesopotamia gave us its warlords carved in stone. Rome gave us its Caesars. But there was once a civilization greater than all of them. It stretched across nearly 400,000 square miles, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It built cities of astonishing precision, with running water and sewage systems the world would not see again for 4,000 years. It traded with distant empires across the sea, and then it vanished. No conquering army marched through its gates. No volcano buried it in ash. It simply disappeared, taking its secrets with it. And here is the strangest part of all. In more than a century of digging, in city after city after city, archaeologists have never found a single king. No throne, no royal tomb, no statue of a god-emperor demanding worship. A civilization of millions, and no rulers we can name. So who governed them? Why did they never go to war? And what could possibly make an entire world of people simply walk away from the greatest cities on Earth? To answer that, we have to travel back more than 5,000 years to the banks of a river that has since changed its course in the far northwest of the Indian subcontinent. The land itself holds the first clue. Long before the cities rose, the plains between the Indus River and a second great river to the east were among the most fertile on the planet. Every year, the rivers flooded and retreated, leaving behind rich black silt, perfect for wheat, for barley, for cotton. Small farming villages appeared here as early as 7,000 years before our time, in places we now call Mergar. These were not primitive people scratching at the dirt. They domesticated cattle. They fired pottery. They shaped tiny beads of turquoise and carved ornaments from seashells, carried hundreds of miles from the coast. For thousands of years, these villages grew slowly, quietly, generation after generation. And then, around 4,600 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Almost as if a single idea had spread across the entire region at once. These scattered villages began to transform into something the world had never seen before. They began to build cities, not chaotic clusters of huts, but planned cities, laid out with a discipline that borders on the impossible. And to understand just how strange that was, you have to see one of them for yourself. Imagine walking toward the city we now call Mohenjo-Daro, the mound of the dead, 4,500 years ago. From a distance, it rises above the floodplain, on a foundation of mud, brick, and rubble, deliberately raised to survive the annual floods. As you draw closer, the walls come into focus, made not of rough stone, but of millions of baked bricks, each one identical to the next. This is the first great mystery of the Indus people. Their bricks in every city, across a territory the size of Western Europe, were made to the same proportions, a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, the same standard used by builders separated by hundreds of miles, with no evidence of a central capital forcing them to obey. You pass through the streets, and they are straight. They run north to south and east to west, crossing at clean right angles, dividing the city into orderly blocks. This is not how ancient cities grew. Ancient cities twisted and tangled, growing like weeds. This one was planned before the first brick was ever laid, as if someone had drawn the entire city on paper, and only then begun to build. But the true wonder of the Indus cities lies beneath your feet. Along the edge of every street runs a covered drain, built of brick and sealed, carrying waste water away from the homes. Almost every house, even modest ones, had access to a private bathing area and a toilet connected to this network. Waste flowed out of the homes, into the street drains, and away from the city. There were brick-lined wells for fresh water, hundreds of them, so that no family had to walk far to drink. Consider what this means. 5,000 years ago, an ordinary family in this city had cleaner water and better sanitation than most people in Europe would enjoy. Until the 19th century of our own era. The Romans, thousands of years later, would be remembered for their plumbing. But the Indus people had done it, first, quietly in every home, without leaving us a single boast carved in stone. At the heart of Mohenjo-Daro sits its most famous structure, and its most puzzling. A great rectangular pool, 40 feet long and 8 feet deep, sunk into a raised platform of brick. Its floor was made watertight, with finely fitted bricks and a layer of natural tar, so precisely sealed that it could still hold water today. Steps lead down into it from both ends. Around it stand small rooms and a wide colonnade. We call it the Great Bath. But no one truly knows what it was for. There is no inscription to tell us. Most believe it was sacred, a place of ritual cleansing, where the people of the city purified themselves in some ceremony now lost to us forever. Standing at its edge, you begin to feel the strangeness of these people. They built with the precision of engineers, yet left us no temple we can clearly name, no idol we can be certain they worshipped. Their greatest public building was not a palace, and not a shrine to a king. It was a place to be clean. Walk a little further through the city, and daily life reveals itself in small, human details. In the great structure near the citadel, rows of solid brick platforms once held vast stores of grain, feeding the city through lean seasons. In the workshops, artisans strung tiny beads of carnelian and agate, drilling them with a skill so refined that some of the holes are finer than a modern needle could make by hand. Children played with terracotta toys, small carts with wheels that still turn, whistles shaped like birds, and dice for games whose rules are lost. Women wore bangles of shell and copper and fired clay. The people ate wheat and barley, lentils and dates, the flesh of cattle and fish from the rivers. They wove cotton into cloth, quite possibly the first people on earth to do so. This was not a grim society of toiling slaves. It was a living, breathing world of craftsmen and merchants and families, ordered and prosperous, going quietly about the business of a good life. And this is where the deepest mystery begins to take shape. In Egypt, the largest structures were tombs and temples. monuments to god-kings who ruled in life and death. In Mesopotamia, towering ziggurats reached toward the heavens for the gods, and palaces glorified conquering rulers. But in the Indus cities, there are no palaces. There are no royal tombs stuffed with treasure. There are no giant statues of a triumphant emperor crushing his enemies underfoot. In every other early civilization, power announced itself loudly, in gold and stone and blood. Here, it is silent. The homes, though some are larger than others, show no vast gulf between a ruling class living in splendor and a mass of slaves living in squalor. It is as if this was a civilization without kings, a society of millions that ran with the order of a single mind, yet left behind no single face to worship. Historians still argue over how it was possible. Was it ruled by councils of merchants? By priests? By a shared belief so powerful it needed no crown to enforce it? We do not know. And the one thing that might have told us, we still cannot read. Across these cities, archaeologists have found thousands of small square seals, most carved from a soft stone called steatite. On them are beautiful, precise images. A humped bull, a tiger, a mysterious one-horned animal that looks like a unicorn, the most common image of all. And above these animals, a line of symbols, a script the Indus people wrote. On seals, on pottery, on copper tablets, they left behind more than 400 distinct signs. For 100 years, the greatest minds in the world have tried to read them. Codebreakers, linguists, computers loaded with statistical models, all have tried. All have failed. We do not know what language they spoke. We do not know their own name for themselves. We cannot read a single sentence they wrote. Somewhere in those undeciphered symbols may lie the names of their leaders, the stories of their gods, the answer to every question we still ask. But the words sit there, silent, locked, staring back at us across 5,000 years. A civilization that speaks to us in a voice we cannot understand. Yet even in their silence, the Indus people tell us they were not isolated. They were reaching outward, across the known world. In the coastal city of Lothal, far to the south, archaeologists uncovered a vast brick basin, more than 700 feet long, connected to a channel that once linked it to the sea. Many believe it was a dockyard, perhaps the oldest known in the world, where boats were loaded and unloaded on the tides. From here and from other ports, the Indus people sailed. Their distinctive seals and beads and weights have been found far to the west, in the ruins of Mesopotamia. In the ancient clay records of Sumer and Akkad, scribes wrote of a distant land they called Meluhha, a place of exotic goods, of carnelian and copper and ivory and rare woods. Most scholars now believe Meluhha was the Indus civilization itself. Picture it. While Egypt raised its pyramids and Sargon of Akkad forged the world's first empire, ships from the Indus were carrying beautiful red carnelian beads and fine cotton across the Arabian Sea, trading with the great powers of the age as equals. And their measurements traveled with them. Their system of weights, tiny precise cubes of stone, was so exact and so uniform that it stitched together an entire economy across thousands of miles without a single coin ever being minted. There is one city that captures their genius better than any other. Far to the south and east, on a barren, sun-scorched island, ringed by salt flats, the Indus people built a city we now call Dholavira. It was one of the most hostile places imaginable to raise a metropolis, a land with almost no fresh water and little rain. And yet, they thrived there for centuries. How? By becoming perhaps the finest water engineers of the ancient world. They carved enormous reservoirs directly into the rock, ringing the entire city, catching and storing every drop of the brief seasonal rains. They built dams and channels to divert 2 seasonal streams into these tanks. They constructed one of the earliest known systems of water harvesting on the planet, turning a desert island into a garden city that endured for 1,000 years. And at Dholavira, they left us one more tantalizing riddle, set above one of the city's great gateways. Archaeologists found a long inscription, 10 large symbols of the Indus script, each nearly a foot tall, arranged in a row. It is often called the world's first signboard. It may have been the name of the city itself, spelled out in letters for all to see. It stood there for 4,000 years, and still we cannot read a single word of it. So this was their world at its height. A civilization spread across more than 1,000 towns and cities. Millions of people living in clean, ordered streets, fed by fertile rivers, trading across script of their own, apparently without kings, without grand armies, without the endless wars that consumed every other ancient power. For 700 years, through the mature height of their culture, they thrived. By every measure we use to judge success, they had built something close to a miracle, which makes what happened next the greatest mystery of all. Because around 3,900 years ago, this world began to fall apart, and to this day, no one can say for certain why. The signs of decline appear slowly, then all at once. In the great cities, the famous discipline begins to fade. The neat grid of streets is broken as makeshift structures are thrown up in what were once open avenues. The perfect drains fall into disrepair. The standardized weights and the beautiful seals appear. Less and less. The long-distance trade that once linked them to Mesopotamia dries up. In city after city, the population thins. People are leaving. Mohenjo-Daro, once home to tens of thousands, empties out. Harappa fades. The bricks stop being fired to their ancient standard. And then the cities fall silent altogether, left to the wind and the drifting sand. The question that has haunted archaeologists for a century is simple. What drove them out? For a long time, one dramatic answer held the popular imagination. It was said that fierce invaders swept down from the northwest, waves of warriors on horseback and chariots, who stormed the cities and put their people to the sword. It was a story of conquest of one people, destroying another. But the more the earth was searched, the less that story held together, because there is almost no evidence of it. In all the ruins of the Indus cities, there are remarkably few weapons of war, no great scenes of battle, no burned cities filled with slaughtered defenders, and the arrowheads of an attacking army, the dramatic tale of a violent invasion, once taught as fact, has quietly crumbled under the weight of what the ground actually reveals. These people, it seems, were not conquered. So, if no army destroyed them, the killer must have been something far larger and far more patient. The answer, most scientists now believe, was written not in the wars of men, but in the slow turning of the sky and the earth. The Indus civilization was a child of its rivers. Everything depended on the floods arriving each year, gentle enough to enrich the soil, reliable enough to feed millions. And around 4,000 years ago, that ancient rhythm began to break. The evidence comes from the earth itself, from ancient sediments and cave formations that record the climate of the deep past. They tell of a dramatic shift. The summer monsoon, the great engine of rain that fed the whole region, began to weaken. Century by century, less rain fell. The floods that farmers had depended on for 2,000 years grew unreliable, then failed. And there was something else. Alongside the mighty Indus flowed another river system to the east, the one many identify with the lost Sarasvati of ancient memory. Many of the greatest Indus settlements clustered along its banks, but this river was fed largely by seasonal rains, rather than by eternal mountain glaciers. As the monsoon faltered and the earth shifted beneath it, this great river began to dwindle. Its channels ran dry. Slowly, the water that had given birth to a civilization drained away into the sand. And a civilization built on water cannot survive its loss. Imagine living through it, not as a single catastrophe, but across generations. Your grandfather remembers full harvests and crowded festivals. Your father remembers leaner years and a river running thinner each spring. And you, standing in a half-empty city where the drains no longer flow and the great markets have gone quiet, must make a choice. There is no invading army to fight. There is no monster to slay. There is only the slow, merciless retreat of the water and the fields turning to dust. And so, quietly, family by family, the Indus people made the only choice that made sense. They did not die in one great cataclysm. They walked away. They moved east and south, toward the lands where the rain still fell, toward the valley of the Ganges. They abandoned the greatest cities in the world, not in a single day of fire and blood, but over long, sad decades, following the water as it withdrew. The cities they left behind were swallowed by the earth, their brilliant bricks buried under the dust of 40 centuries, until the very memory of them was erased from the human story. And erased it truly was. For nearly 4,000 years, the world forgot that this civilization had ever existed. It appears in no triumphant history, no surviving epic that names its cities. It slipped entirely out of memory, as if it had never been. Which brings us to one final, almost unbearable irony. In the 1850s, deep in the age of the British Empire, engineers were laying a railway line across the plains of the Punjab. To build the tracks, they needed a firm foundation. Tons of hard, well-fired brick, and there, conveniently, stood ancient mounds full of exactly that, beautiful, hard-baked bricks, better than anything the local kilns produced. So, the workers dug into the mounds and carried the bricks away by the thousands, ballast for a railway, for miles. Trains would one day run over a foundation made from the bones of Harappa, one of the oldest cities on earth, without a single soul understanding what had been destroyed. The greatest cities of a forgotten world, torn apart to lay a train track. Their secret, still sleeping beneath them. It was not until the 1920s that archaeologists finally began to grasp the truth. Digging at Harappa and at Mohenjo-Daro, they realized these were not the ruins of some minor town or a lost outpost of a known empire. They were looking at the remains of an entirely unknown civilization, as old as Egypt, as vast as any in the ancient world, and utterly forgotten. In a single stroke, human history grew older and larger than anyone had imagined. A whole chapter, missing for 4 millennia, was suddenly reopened. And with it came all the questions we still cannot answer. Among the artifacts they lifted from the earth were 2 that seemed to gaze back at us across time. One is a small carved figure of a bearded man, calm and dignified, his eyes half closed, as if in deep meditation. We call him the priest king, though we have no idea if he was a priest or a king or neither. The other is a tiny bronze figure of a young woman, one hand resting on her hip, her chin lifted in an attitude of complete confidence, frozen mid-step in a dance that ended 4,500 years ago. We call her the dancing girl. She has no name that we will ever know, but in her small, defiant pose, we catch a glimpse of them, of who these people were. Not just engineers and traders and builders of drains, but human beings with pride and grace and joy. So let us return, at last, to the mystery we began with. A civilization greater than Egypt, that built cleaner cities than Rome, that traded across the sea and wrote in an unknown hand, and yet left us no kings, no conquerors, no god-emperors demanding to be remembered. Perhaps that was never a failure. Perhaps it was their choice. Perhaps they measured greatness not in the height of a monument to one man, but in the fresh water running to every home, in the clean street outside every door, in 1,000 years of relative peace. They raised no ruler above the people. And so, when the rivers finally failed them, there was no emperor to fall, no dynasty to shatter, no glorious catastrophe to be sung about for the ages. There was only a quiet, dignified people, gathering their children and their memories, and moving on. They did not vanish because they were weak. They endured and adapted and let go in a way that few civilizations ever have. Their blood, their culture, and their inventions flowed onward into the India that came after, into a story still being told today. The cities died, but the people, in a sense, never truly did. And that, perhaps, is the real answer to the mystery of the Indus. The world's greatest lost civilization was never really lost at all. It was simply waiting patient and silent as its own unread script for us to remember it. If you would like to keep traveling with us through the forgotten corners of the human past, stay a while longer and let the next story begin.